Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's just dive right in with a cinematic look at global commerce. I want you to picture the bustling espresso bars in Rome, the high-end luxury boutiques in Tokyo, massive digital shopping carts over on Amazon, and busy international airport terminals. Every single day, billions of human interactions. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the flights we take, they're all being quietly powered by one invisible force. It's an invisible empire, really, sitting right there at the very center of the global financial system, just silently orchestrating the modern world. Look at this scale. Every single second, thousands of transactions are happening simultaneously all across the globe, processing absolute trillions of dollars annually. And when we hear the word trillions, our minds immediately jump to massive bank vaults, armored cars, and taking on huge lending risks, right? To move more money than the gross domestic product of most countries on Earth, you'd probably assume this entity is the world's largest, most aggressive lender. But here's the ultimate curiosity loop for you. Despite moving all of that incredible wealth, Visa itself takes on almost zero lending risk. I know, this entirely shatters almost everything we assume about the credit card industry. Visa doesn't actually lend you money. They rarely own that physical piece of plastic sitting in your wallet right now. They absolutely do not hold your checking deposits, and they are definitely not the ones charging you that brutal 20% interest rate if you happen to miss a payment. Honestly, they don't really care if you're buying a $2 cup of coffee or a $20,000 jet ski. So that begs the big question. How exactly does a company make billions of dollars every single year without actually acting as a traditional bank? Well, here's our roadmap to deconstruct this massive financial empire and figure out exactly how they pull this off. We'll cover 1. The illusion of credit. 2. The invisible payment network. 3. The toll road model. 4. VisaNet and global security. 5. The competition. And finally, 6. The future of payments. Okay, starting with Section 1. The illusion of credit and the origins of consumer debt. To really understand the giant that Visa is today, we have to rewind a bit and look at the intense friction of early consumer credit. Back in the 1950s, if you wanted credit, you essentially had a separate tab at every individual local store. The grocer had their own ledger, the hardware store had a ledger. It was a mess. Eventually, we got the Bank AmeriCard, which was a revolutionary credit card issued by a single bank that you could actually use at multiple merchants. But as consumer credit exploded, a single bank trying to issue cards to just its own customers across the entire country, it just wasn't scalable. It was an administrative nightmare. So in the 1970s, this brilliant evolution occurred. They shifted from being a closed bank-issued card into an independent, open network designed to connect multiple competing banks together under one unified flag, Visa. They realized the ultimate power wasn't in giving people money. No, it was in connecting the banks who give the money to the merchants who accept it. Moving on to Section 2, the invisible payment network and its micromechanics. So in every single transaction you make, you basically have two major banking players operating behind the scenes. Let's use a concrete example. Say you're buying a pair of shoes at a local boutique. First, you have the acquiring bank. This is the bank that represents the shoe store. It's the institution where the merchant ultimately wants their money deposited. On the other side, you have the issuing bank. This is the bank that actually gave you, the consumer, the credit card. They're the ones putting up the funds and taking on the absolute risk if you decide, hey, I'm just not going to pay my credit card bill next month. And this whole setup kicks off an incredible communication dance that happens in the literal blink of an eye. Step 1, you tap your card at the terminal. Step 2, the merchant's acquiring bank fires off a high-speed request for authorization. Step 3, Visa steps in, routing that data across the world directly to your specific bank. Step 4, your issuing bank checks your available balance, approves the transaction, and then Visa routes that yes all the way back to the terminal. Tap, ask, route, approve. All 4 of these wildly complex steps happen in absolute milliseconds. Visa is simply the incredibly fast messenger connecting every single participant. But surprisingly, your tap at the terminal, that's really only half the story. That initial millisecond tap is just authorization. It's essentially a digital promise to pay. Behind the scenes, clearing and settlement has to occur later on. Think of this like closing out a massive global bar tab at the end of the day. Visa aggregates the millions of transactions that happen worldwide, figures out exactly who owes what to whom, and orchestrates the settlement. They ensure the net differences are moved from the issuing banks over to the acquiring banks. They make sure every single merchant gets paid and every single bank balances its books, all without Visa ever putting up a single cent of its own capital to pay for your shoes. Which brings us to Section 3, the toll road model. Let's talk about how Visa actually makes its billions. If Visa isn't collecting that steep 20% annual interest rate from consumers, their massive net income obviously has to come from elsewhere. Think of Visa not as a bank, but as a heavily trafficked financial highway. They operate a pure toll road model. For every single transaction that drives on their highway, Visa charges a tiny fraction of a cent at the toll booth. And they generate revenue through multiple, highly efficient streams here. Service fees charged to the banks just for being on the network, data processing fees for routing those millisecond authorizations we just talked about, cross-border transaction fees when you buy something internationally, and value-added services like advanced cybersecurity. Now, one tiny fraction of a penny might seem entirely insignificant, but when you multiply it by tens of thousands of transactions every single second, 365 days a year, wow, it generates tens of billions of dollars. And the stark contrast in business models is exactly why this is so incredibly lucrative for them. On one side, you have the issuing bank. They carry some super heavy operational burdens. They have to compete fiercely for your attention, offer massive sign-up bonuses, pay for those fancy airport lounges, manage aggressive customer support, and most importantly, they absorb the actual financial ruin if a customer defaults on their loan. On the other side, you have Visa, the open network. They run a highly scalable, incredibly low-risk technology business. Processing an extra billion transactions doesn't really cost Visa much in overhead because, well, the digital highway is already built. This makes their profit margins absolutely staggering when you compare them to traditional lenders.
Section 4, VisaNet and Global Security. Let's look at trust and 99.9% uptime.
So, to justify charging tolls to the world's biggest banks, Visa's actual infrastructure has to be virtually flawless. Visa's true product isn't plastic at all. They're selling absolute trust and 99.9% uptime to the world. Through VisaNet, they offer millisecond transaction speed and global redundancy through these massive fortified data centers. But the real magic? That's in the security. They utilize advanced artificial intelligence that analyzes hundreds of variables in real time on every single swipe to catch thieves instantly. Furthermore, they use advanced tokenization. Think of tokenization as a disposable digital disguise. When you check out online, your actual card number is hidden and replaced by a temporary, meaningless token. So if a hacker breaches the merchant, all they get is garbage data that can literally never be used again. All right, Section 5, the competition. Let's compare the different models out there. Of course, Visa doesn't operate in a vacuum, so let's impartially compare the major players powering the global economy right now. Visa and MasterCard both operate on the open network model. They act strictly as the tech network, partnering with thousands of issuing banks to distribute their cards. This leads to massive global merchant acceptance with almost zero lending risk for the network itself. On the flip side, networks like American Express and Discover have historically operated on what we call a closed-loop model. In a closed loop, the company acts as both the network and the issuing bank. This means they capture all the revenue from interest and merchant fees, which is great for them, but they also take on the actual credit risk of their consumers. Merchants might accept slightly higher fees from a closed-loop network because it often brings in high-spending customers, but it remains a fundamentally different risk profile powering the exact same physical action of swiping a card. Finally, Section 6, the future of payments. Let's talk about adapting to disruption. The financial landscape is shifting rapidly, isn't it? We've got the rise of digital wallets like Apple Pay, the ongoing exploration of central bank digital currencies, the introduction of stablecoins, and even biometric authentication, where you literally pay with a quick scan of your palm. But Visa is adapting strategically through this really incredible concept, understanding the difference between the faucet and the plumbing. Think about it. When you wash your hands, you don't really care what the faucet looks like as long as water comes out, right? Apple Pay and biometric scanners are just shiny new faucets for the consumer. But beneath the surface, the data still needs to be routed securely from the merchant to the funding source. Visa is working furiously to ensure they remain the underlying plumbing of the digital economy, regardless of what that faucet actually looks like. Ultimately, their ultimate defense against all this new disruption comes down to a classic economic concept, the power of the network effect. According to verified statistics from the Federal Reserve and the World Bank, the sheer annual payment volume and global merchant acceptance of Visa makes it a two-sided market that is nearly impossible for a startup to bypass. I mean, merchants happily accept Visa because practically all consumers have it in their pockets, and consumers confidently carry Visa because essentially all merchants accept it. It's a brilliant, self-reinforcing loop that builds an incredibly expensive, highly protective moat around their business that literally took decades to dig. And that brings us to a rather cinematic realization about the modern world. The most valuable company isn't always the one taking the massive risk to sell the end product or fund the loan.
Often, the ultimate winner is simply the one connecting everyone else. The world's financial system isn't powered by cash alone anymore. It's powered by these invisible data networks operating in the milliseconds between our everyday actions. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. As advanced artificial intelligence and aggressive new fintech disruptors enter the arena, who will build the financial roads of tomorrow? Will a brand new technology eventually figure out how to bypass Visa's mighty toll road entirely? Or will Visa continue to quietly, invisibly connect the world for decades to come? The very nature of money is changing beneath our feet, and now you understand exactly why. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.
Thanks for watching World Decoded. Make sure to like and share, subscribe, and stay curious.